My mother leaned into the microphone and sighed. Some children build the family legacy. Others just drain the accounts. The crowd chuckled. I smiled back and said, good thing my accounts are completely independent now. You won't have to worry about my drain on your legacy anymore. The gala was for the grand unveiling of the Azure Marina, the $150 million luxury development my mother's firm, Caldwell Estates, had hyped for years. We were in a Miami ballroom, surrounded by politicians and investors. My sister Brooke was seated by the podium. At 28, Brooke was already COO, draped in absurdly expensive silk. I was banished to table 24 near the kitchen doors. I had flown in that morning from Chicago. It was my first time seeing my family in 3 years. The speeches dragged on. Brooke gave a tearful tribute. My mother took the stage. She gestured toward Brooke and beamed. To my beautiful daughter, she said, who will carry the Caldwell name to heights I can only dream of. Applause echoed off the chandeliers. She squinted past the spotlights, spotted me, and smiled. And to my youngest, she added, some children build the family legacy. Others just drain the accounts. Awkward laughter rippled through the ballroom. My sister smirked. I placed my dessert spoon on the table, picked up my sparkling water, and stood up. Good thing my accounts are independent now, I called back. You won't have to worry about my drain on your legacy anymore. My mother forced a patronizing laugh. Oh, sweetheart, she said into the mic. You've been talking about making it big since you dropped out. Are you still renting that tiny studio? Actually, I just bought a penthouse in the Gold Coast, I said. Cash? The room went quiet. Brooke lowered her glass. My mother gripped the edges of the podium. To keep the Azure Marina afloat, my mother had secured a $45 million mezzanine loan from a private equity firm in Chicago called Oakhaven Capital. She treated the firm like an infinite ATM, boasting that the Midwestern bankers were too stupid to call in the debt. I started at Oakhaven Capital 5 years ago, I said, walking down the center aisle. An entry-level analyst position, the job nobody asked about. I made director of risk management 2 years ago, another milestone nobody asked about. Last Tuesday, I was promoted to managing director of distressed assets. I oversee the restructuring of every commercial loan over $20 million. My mother's face flushed a mottled red. Brooke connected the dots first. Her chair scraped against the marble as she stood up. The Caldwell mezzanine loan breached its liquidity covenants on October 1st, I said. I'm the one handling the file. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a thick envelope. I had our legal department drafted on Friday. I walked to the stage, climbed the velvet stairs, and set the envelope on top of my mother's speech notes. It was a formal notice of default. It detailed how Caldwell Estates had falsified cash reserves to hide their insolvency. My mother's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Brooke rushed the stage, her heels clicking. Wait, you can't do this. We just need until the spring pre-sales. Brooke stammered. Step back, Brooke, I said quietly. She stopped dead. My mother found her voice, dropping the mic to her side. Darling, please, it was just a joke for the crowd. You know I love you. You can't destroy everything I've built over a silly comment. You had 3 years to ask me what city I lived in, I said. You had 3 years to ask what I did for a living. You used me as a punchline tonight to make yourself look bigger. Well, here's the punchline. I'm the person who decides if your name stays on this building, or if Oakhaven sells it for parts. I turned my back on the podium. I walked down the center aisle, past the stunned politicians, past the whispering investors. Brooke yelled my name once. I pushed through the heavy brass doors. The foreclosure was filed on Monday morning. I flew back to Chicago and went straight to the office. Over the next 2 weeks, my mother left 22 frantic voicemails on my cell. I listened to the first one. I deleted the rest. On the 23rd day, it wasn't my mother who called. It was a number I didn't recognize. A Miami area code. I picked up out of habit. Miss Caldwell. The voice was measured, unhurried. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm a senior investigator with the SEC. We've had the Azure Marina file open for 14 months. A pause. We're not calling about your mother. We're calling about Oakhaven Capital. Specifically about the terms under which that mezzanine loan was originally structured. Another pause. Longer this time. We need to know how much you knew. And when. I didn't breathe for a full 3 seconds. My office suddenly felt entirely too large. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River offering no comfort. In corporate finance, you don't panic. You calculate. Mr. Reyes, I said, my voice perfectly level. I am the managing director of distressed assets. I took over this portfolio precisely 28 days ago. Any questions regarding the origination of the loan will need to be directed to our general counsel. I'm aware of when you were promoted, Reyes said. There was the faint sound of typing in the background. I'm also aware that your signature is on the Uniform Commercial Code foreclosure notice. Because a mezzanine loan is secured by a pledge of equity interests in the entity that owns the property. Rather than the real estate itself, your firm is positioning to seize 100% of Caldwell Estates equity. That is standard procedure for a default of this magnitude, I replied. Standard procedure, Reyes repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Miss Caldwell, let me be very blunt. We don't believe Oakhaven just discovered the falsified cash reserves. We believe Oakhaven knew the reserves were falsified 3 years ago, when the loan was underwritten. We believe they funded your mother anyway, fully expecting her to fail, so they could bypass a traditional mortgage foreclosure and directly take title to the property. It's a predatory loan-to-own scheme, and it crosses into securities fraud because Oakhaven subsequently packaged this debt and sold tranches of it to public pension funds. The chill started at the base of my neck and radiated down my spine. I have no knowledge of the original underwriting, I said. Have your office send a formal subpoena to Oakhaven's legal department. Good afternoon. I ended the call. I set the phone face down on my desk. I looked at the framed promotion letter sitting on my credenza. Managing Director. Stellan Trask, the senior partner who ran the commercial debt division, had called me into his office less than a a month ago to hand me that letter. He had poured me a glass of Macallan. He had told me I earned it. I hadn't earned it. I was the perfect scapegoat. They needed someone to initiate the aggressive takeover of Azure Marina, someone whose presence on the paperwork would mask the firm's predatory intent. Who better to foreclose on Caldwell Estates than a Caldwell? It looked like a bitter family dispute, not a calculated corporate raiding strategy. Stellan had played me perfectly. He let me use my mother's gala as my own personal revenge theater, all while he was shielding the firm from a federal investigation. I picked up my phone, bypassed my assistant, and dialed the internal extension for compliance. Nadia Wynn, a sharp voice answered. Nadia, it's me, I said. I need read access to the original origination file for the Caldwell mezzanine debt, the one from 3 years ago. A brief hesitation. That file is archived in the legacy server. You're distressed assets now. You only need the default metrics. I need the underwriting emails I pushed, right now. I can't do that without Stellan's authorization, Nadia said. Her tone had dropped an octave. It was the tone people used when they knew the room was bugged. I'm sorry. I have to go. She hung up. I stood up and smoothed the front of my skirt. I walked out of my office, past the rows of analysts staring blankly at Bloomberg terminals, and headed straight for the executive suites at the end of the hall. Stellan Trask's door was cracked open. He was sitting at his massive oak desk, eating a $25 chopped salad out of a plastic container, reading the Wall Street Journal. He looked up as I walked in and closed the door behind. Is the air conditioning broken in your wing? Stellan asked, stabbing a cherry tomato. You look flushed. Daniel Reyes. Sec, I said, sitting in the leather chair opposite him. He just called my personal cell. Stellan didn't miss a beat. He chewed, swallowed, and dabbed his mouth with a napkin. And what did you tell him? I told him to talk to legal. Then he told me that Oakhaven intentionally underwrote a fraudulent loan to seize a $150 million property for a $45 million investment. The SEC is remarkably creative these days, Stellan said, tossing the napkin into the trash. Your mother lied on her liquidity covenants. You caught it. You filed the default. You did your job. You knew, I said, leaning forward. 3 years ago, when Oakhaven gave her the money, you knew her cash reserves were fake. Nadia Wynn in compliance must have flagged it. You buried the flag and funded the loan anyway because you wanted the marina. Stellan leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. The friendly mentor mask slipped, revealing the cold, mechanical calculus beneath. Your mother, Stellan said quietly, is a narcissist with a penchant for spending money she doesn't have. We provided her with a financial rope. She chose to tie it around her own neck. That's not fraud. That's capitalism. It's fraud if you repackage that debt and sold it to the Ohio Teachers Pension Fund as a secure investment, I countered, which is exactly what you did. And you promoted me last month so that when the SEC finally came knocking, the entire foreclosure would look like an emotional family vendetta. You made me the face of the hostile takeover. You made yourself the face of it, sweetheart, Stellan said, his voice hardening. You're the one who walked up on that stage in Miami. You're the one who dropped the envelope on the podium. You wanted to humiliate her. I just gave you the envelope. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. Oakhaven is going to take that property. The SEC will make some noise, but ultimately, the math is on our side. You are the managing director of distressed assets. Your signature is on the filings. If you get skittish now, if you try to pull the default or cooperate with Reyes, you aren't just firing yourself, you're implicating yourself. You signed the paperwork. I stared at him. The trap was watertight. If I pushed back against Oakhaven, Stellan would throw me to the SEC as the rogue executive who orchestrated the whole thing. If I stayed quiet, I was an accessory to securities fraud. Get back to your desk, Stellan said, pulling his salad back toward him. Manage your portfolio. And if the SEC calls again, let it go to voicemail. I left his office. The hallway felt miles long. When I got back to my desk, my assistant, a 22-year-old kid named Arlo, was standing awkwardly in my doorway. What is it, Arlo? I asked, exhausted. You have a visitor, he said, shifting his weight. Down in the lobby. She doesn't have an appointment, but she said it's a family emergency. A Miss Brooke Caldwell. I closed my eyes. Send her up. 10 minutes later, Brooke walked into my office. The transformation was staggering. The Miami gala had been less than a month ago, but she looked like she had aged 5 years. The tailored silk was gone, replaced by a wrinkled trench coat and a gray cashmere sweater that looked like it had been slept in. She carried a scuffed leather tote bag. She stood in the center of the room, looking at the view of the river, then at the heavy mahogany furniture, and finally at me. Nice office, she said. Her voice was hollow. What are you doing in Chicago, Brooke? I asked, staying behind my desk. She dropped the tote bag onto the floor. It landed with a heavy, ungraceful thud. She sank into the guest chair, pulling her coat tight around her shoulders. They froze the operating accounts, Brooke said, staring at her hands. Oakhaven's lawyers got an injunction on Friday. We can't pay the contractors. The drywallers walked off the site this morning. The plumbers are threatening to put liens on the property. It's over. That's how a default works, I said flatly. You breached the covenants. The lender protects the asset. I'm not here about the company, Brooke said, looking up at me. Her eyes were bloodshot. I'm here about Mom. I tightened my grip on the pen I was holding. Mom's pride will recover. She can start over. She didn't just pledge the company's equity, you idiot, Brooke snapped, a flash of her old arrogance breaking through the exhaustion. She signed a bad boy carve-out, a personal recourse guarantee. The room went dead silent. In commercial real estate, loans are generally non-recourse. If the project fails, the bank takes the building, but the developer's personal money is safe. But a bad boy carve-out is a clause that destroys that protection if the developer commits fraud. If they lie about their financials, the corporate veil dissolves. The lender can take everything. Their houses, their cars, their personal bank accounts. Everything. Oakhaven is triggering the carve-out, Brooke said, her voice shaking. They aren't just taking the Azure Marina. They're taking the house house in Boca. They're taking her retirement accounts. They're even going after the trust fund she set up for my kids. I stared at her. She lied on the liquidity reserves, Brooke. She committed fraud. And you handed the executioner the axe. Brooke yelled, slamming her hand on my desk. She's 62 years old. She has nothing else. If Oakhaven takes her personal assets, she will be out on the street. Do you understand that? Your own mother. She shouldn't have lied on the loan application, I said, forcing my voice to remain clinical, even as my stomach turned over. You think she wanted to? Brooke laughed, a bitter, desperate sound. The supply chain issues delayed construction by 8 months. The steel tariffs wrecked the budget. She was trying to keep the company alive. She thought she could sell enough units in the spring to cover the gap before anyone noticed. Brooke leaned across the desk, her eyes pleading. You're the managing director. You manage the distressed assets. You have the authority to waive the bad boy carve-out. Take the building. Fine. You won. You proved your point. But waive the personal recourse. Let her keep her house. I looked at my sister. For the first time in my life, I held absolute power over her, over my mother, over the entire toxic ecosystem I had fled. But I didn't have the power she thought I did. If I waived the personal recourse guarantee, Stellan Trask would immediately flag it. He would use it as proof that I was acting in my own family's interest, violating my fiduciary duty to Oakhaven. It would give him the exact ammunition he needed to fire me and hand me to the SEC on a silver platter. I can't do it, I said. Brooke stared at me, the hope draining from her face, replaced by a cold, settling disgust. You can't, or you won't. I don't have the authorization to waive a recourse guarantee on a $45 million default without committee approval. I lied, and the committee won't approve it. The fraud is documented. Brooke stood up slowly. She picked up her tote bag. She was right about you, Brooke said softly. At the gala, she said you drain the accounts. You don't build anything. You just tear down what other people make. She didn't wait for a response. She walked out of the office, leaving the door wide open. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the HVAC system. The rain was beating harder against the glass now. I waited until the floor emptied out around 8 p.m. The analysts packed up their gym bags and trickled out to the elevators. The cleaning crew moved through the halls with their heavy vacuums. I walked out to Arlo's desk. He had gone home hours ago. I booted up his computer. As my assistant, Arlo had lower-tier security clearance, but he also had proxy access to the legacy servers to pull historical data from my current portfolios. I logged in using his credentials. I searched for the Caldwell Estates origination file from 3 years ago. Nadia Wynn was right. The main file was locked behind Stellan's executive firewall. But people in finance are lazy. They don't just communicate through official channels. They send attachments. They forward things to their personal iPads. I searched the internal email server for any correspondence between Stellan Trask and the former underwriter, a guy named Lachlan Trask, Stellan's nephew. Lachlan had left the firm 2 years ago to start a boutique hedge fund. I narrowed the search parameters. Caldwell, liquidity, risk A thread popped up, dated October 14th, 3 years ago, 2 weeks before the mezzanine loan was finalized. It was an email from Nadia Wynn to Lachlan Trask. Lachlan, the bank statements provided by Caldwell Estates for the Q3 liquidity check appear to be doctored. The routing numbers don't align with the institutional formatting for Chase Commercial. I believe they are inflating their cash reserves by at least $12 million. We cannot legally fund this. Nadia. Lachlan had forwarded that email to Stellan with a single line of text. Uncle S. Looks like the Caldwell woman is cooking the books. We have to pull the term sheet. And there, at the bottom of the chain, was Stellan's reply. Bury Nadia's report. Approve the term sheet. If she's inflating reserves, she'll breach the covenants before the roof is even on the building. When she defaults, we take the whole marina for the price of the debt. It's a guaranteed 300% ROI. Fund it. I took out my phone and took a photograph of the screen. Then I took another. I printed the email chain to the physical printer in the copy room, walked down the hall, grabbed the paper, and folded it into my purse. Oakhaven didn't just know about the fraud. They engineered the trap. They knowingly participated in a fraudulent transaction to steal the asset. And then they sold pieces of that fraudulent loan to pension funds. Stellan was looking at 20 years in federal prison. I logged out of Arlo's computer and took the elevator down to the lobby. The Chicago wind hit me like a wall of ice as I walked out onto Wacker Drive. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a Google News alert. I had set it up years ago for Caldwell Estates. I clicked the notification. It linked to an exclusive interview published 5 minutes ago in the Miami Business Journal. The headline made my stomach drop. Family betrayal. Caldwell Estates CEO claims hostile foreclosure orchestrated by estranged daughter. I stood under the awning of the building and read the article. My mother had gone on the record. She claimed the company was in perfect financial health. She claimed the default was a malicious, fabricated maneuver by an estranged daughter who used her position at Oakhaven Capital to execute a personal vendetta. She had hired a high-profile litigation firm to sue Oakhaven and me personally for tortious interference and breach of fiduciary duty. She had included quotes. My daughter has struggled with deep resentment toward this family for years, my mother was quoted as saying. It breaks my heart that she would weaponize her corporate position to destroy a project that employs hundreds of hardworking Miami residents, simply to settle a childhood grudge. She was changing the narrative. She was creating a smokescreen to hide the falsified cash reserves, turning a black and white financial default into a messy, subjective family drama. And it was going to work. The public would eat it up. The courts would tie it up in litigation for years. My phone vibrated in my hand. It was Daniel Reyes, the SEC investigator. I stared at the screen for a long time. The streetlights reflected off the wet pavement. I swiped right and held the phone to my ear. Miss Caldwell, Reyes said. He sounded tired. Have you seen the article? I'm reading it right now, I said. Your mother is making a tremendous amount of noise, Reyes said. Noise makes my superiors nervous. They don't like family drama. They like clean numbers. The numbers are clean, I said. She falsified her reserves. O'Caven foreclosed. But O'Caven knew she falsified them, didn't they? Reyes asked quietly. I know how Stellan Trask operates. He doesn't make mistakes. He makes traps. I closed my eyes. The folded piece of paper in my purse felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I need your help, Miss Caldwell, Reyes said. If this turns into a civil defamation circus, the SEC will drop the investigation. It's too messy. Your mother will get away with faking her financials. Stellan Trask will get away with securities fraud. And you will be the one left holding the bag when O'Caven fires you to save face. He paused, letting the reality of my situation settle in. I can offer you immunity, Reyes said. Full federal immunity. But I need internal documentation proving Stellan Trask knew about the fraud before the loan was funded. And I need you to testify in front of a grand jury. Testify against Stellan? I asked. Against Stellan Trask, Reyes corrected. And against your mother. They were both complicit in the original fraud. I need you to put them both in federal prison. I stood frozen on the sidewalk as a yellow cab splashed through a puddle inches from my boots. The icy water soaked the hem of my trousers, but I barely felt it. Federal prison, I repeated, the words tasting like copper in my mouth. Your mother signed the loan documents knowing they contained falsified cash reserves, Reyes said, his voice stripped of any bureaucratic warmth. That is bank fraud. Stellan Trask approved the funding knowing the documents were falsified, with the intent to later seize the collateral. That is a conspiracy to commit wire fraud and securities fraud. They are both looking at significant time. But I need the physical proof regarding O'Caven's internal knowledge. Without it, your mother's PR campaign works. She looks like a victim of a corporate raid, and Stellan looks like a ruthless but legal lender. I gripped the phone tighter. The folded paper in my purse seemed to pulse. All I had to do was say I had it. One sentence, and Stellan's empire crumbles. But my mother goes down with him. I need a lawyer, I said finally. You do, Reyes agreed. Get a good one. Not one paid for by O'Caven. Have them call me by Friday. If we don't have a proffer agreement in place by then, I'm going to subpoena everything, including you, and the immunity offer comes off the table. The line clicked dead. I walked the 6 blocks to my apartment in a daze. The penthouse I had bragged about at the gala suddenly felt like a glass cage. I spent the night sitting in the dark on my leather sofa, staring at the Chicago skyline, the printed email resting on the coffee table in front of me. At 7:10 a.m., my phone started exploding. It wasn't just Google News alerts anymore. It was LinkedIn messages, texts from college acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in a decade, and emails from O'Caven's internal communications team. My mother's interview with the Miami Business Journal had been picked up by a national syndication. The narrative was perfect for the morning news cycle. Greedy Wall Street daughter destroys aging mother's real estate dream. There were photos of my mother looking haggard and betrayed. There was a photo of me from the gala, looking cold and aloof, turning my back on the stage. They had framed it perfectly. I showered, put on my sharpest charcoal suit, and went to the office. If I hid now, I looked guilty. The atmosphere on the trading floor was completely different from the day before. The low hum of banter stopped the second I stepped off the elevator. Arlo was aggressively typing on his keyboard, pretending not to see me as I walked past his desk. I closed my office door and sat down. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. It was Nadia Wynn from compliance. Stellan wants you in conference room B, she said tightly. 5 minutes. Conference room B was the glass-walled box in the center of the executive floor, the firing room. When I walked in, Stellan was there, along with the head of HR and a man I didn't recognize, who introduced himself as Thad Wolf, outside counsel for O'Caven. Have a seat, Stellan said. He wasn't eating a salad today. His face was a mask of calculated concern. I sat at the opposite end of the long mahogany table. We have a public relations crisis on our hands, Stellan began, folding his hands. Your mother's media tour is causing significant reputational damage to the firm. We are getting calls from our institutional investors. The Ohio Teachers Pension Fund is threatening to pull their capital if they are associated with a predatory family dispute. It's not a family dispute, I said evenly. It's a standard default. That's not how it's playing in the press, Thad Wolf interrupted. He had a smooth, practiced voice. Right now it looks like O'Caven allowed an executive to use our balance sheet to settle a personal vendetta. That is an unacceptable liability. Thad slid a manila folder across the table. It stopped inches from my hands. This is a separation agreement, Stellan said. Effective immediately. You will resign for personal reasons. We will provide you with 2 years of salary as severance, and your unvested stock options will immediately vest. In exchange, you will sign a strict non-disclosure agreement regarding the Caldwell Estates file, and you will release a public statement taking sole responsibility for the aggressive nature of the foreclosure. You will state that you acted outside of O'Caven's standard operational protocols. I stared at the folder. You want me to take the fall? We are giving you a very generous parachute, Thad said smoothly, and we are protecting you from further litigation. If you sign this, O'Caven will also cover your legal defense against any civil claims your mother brings against you. And if I don't sign it? I asked. Stellan leaned forward, dropping the Concerned Mentor Act. If you don't sign it, you are fired for cause. Breach of fiduciary duty. We will publicly state that you hid your familial conflict of interest from the investment committee when you took over the distressed assets portfolio. We will join your mother's lawsuit against you. You will never work in finance again, and you will spend the next 10 years bankrupting yourself in federal court. It was a beautiful, terrifying trap. Stellan had completely insulated himself. He was offering me millions of dollars to take the blame for his fraud, while holding a gun to my career if I refused. I need 24 hours to review this with my own counsel, I said, keeping my voice steady. Stellan Stellan looked at Thad, who nodded slightly. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow, Stellan said. I suggest you take the deal. It's the only one you're going to get. I walked out of conference room B, went straight to my office, grabbed my coat and purse, and left the building. I didn't go home. I took a cab to the Loop, walking into the lobby of a high-end corporate litigation firm I had researched on the ride over. I didn't have an appointment, but when you tell the receptionist you're a managing director at Oakhaven Capital looking to retain a partner immediately, doors open. An hour later, I was sitting across from Jasper Ives, a silver-haired shark of a litigator who charged $1,200 an hour. I laid the separation agreement on his desk. Then, I reached into my purse, pulled out the folded printout of the email chain, and laid it next to the agreement. I need you to tell me exactly how much leverage I have, I said. Jasper put on his reading glasses and reviewed the separation agreement first. He hummed quietly, flipping the pages. Then he picked up the printed email. He read it once. He read it a second time. He took his glasses off and looked at me. Where did you get this? Jasper asked. Internal legacy servers, I said. It proves Oakhaven's senior partners knew the Caldwell financials were fraudulent before funding the loan. It proves they orchestrated a loan-to-own scheme. Does anyone know you have this? No. Jasper leaned back in his chair, tapping his glasses against his desk. If you sign the ENDA in this separation agreement, you are legally barred from turning this email over to the SEC. If you violate the ENDA, Oakhaven will sue you into oblivion and claw back your severance. If you don't sign the agreement, Oakhaven destroys your reputation. But you are free to hand this to the federal government. The SEC investigator offered me immunity if I give him the proof, I said. Immunity for what? Jasper countered sharply. Your signature is on the foreclosure notices. You initiated the seizure. Reyes is dangling immunity to get the smoking gun, but until you have a signed proffer, he can use anything you say against you. More importantly, if you hand this over to the DOJ, they aren't just going to indict Stellan Trask. They are going to indict your mother. I know, I said. My chest felt tight. Are you prepared to be the primary witness for the prosecution in a federal criminal trial against your own mother? Jasper asked. His eyes were completely unsympathetic. He was forcing me to look at the reality of the situation, because that's what this piece of paper means. You don't get to choose who goes down. You hand this over, Stellan burns, and your mother burns with him. Before I could answer, my cell phone buzzed on the desk between us. I looked down at the screen. It was a text from Brooke. Mom just had a heart attack. She's at Jackson Memorial. We're in the ICU. I stared at the glowing letters. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. The doctors say it was the stress. The next message read, "Are you happy now?" I stared at the screen until it went dark. My reflection stared back at me from the black glass, pale and hollowed out in the fluorescent light of the law office. Bad news? Jasper Ives asked. His tone was perfectly neutral. He didn't offer a sympathetic tilt of the head. He was a man who traded in disasters. My mother is in the ICU, I said, putting the phone face down on the desk. Heart attack. Jasper didn't blink. He reached over, picked up the printed email chain that could send Stellan Trask to prison, and slid it back across the desk toward me. I am sorry to hear that, Jasper said smoothly. But from a legal standpoint, a medical emergency changes absolutely nothing. The SEC does not halt investigations for hospital visits. Oakhaven will not pause their foreclosure. In fact, Stellan will likely use your mother's incapacitation to accelerate the seizure of the assets while the company is disorganized. I picked up the piece of paper. It felt radioactive. If I sign Stellan's separation agreement, I asked, and I take the severance money, can I use it to pay off the personal recourse guarantee? Can I buy my mother's house back from Oakhaven? Jasper folded his hands. You are asking if you can legally ruin your own reputation, accept hush money from a man committing securities fraud, and then hand that money over to the woman who committed bank fraud to save her from the consequences of her own acts? Yes, I said. You could, Jasper said. The severance is a clean 2-year payout. With vested options, you're looking at roughly $4.5 million. After taxes, it's enough to satisfy the personal bad boy carve-out and get Oakhaven to release the liens on her private accounts. But you will never work in corporate finance again. And if the SEC ever finds out you had this email and buried it for cash, you will be indicted for obstruction of justice. You're trading her prison sentence for yours. He leaned forward. You have until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to give Stellan an answer. You have until Friday to give the SEC an answer. I strongly advise you not to make a decision while you are in a state of emotional shock. Go to Miami, see your mother, but do not discuss this evidence with her, and do not discuss it with your sister. If you do, it is witness tampering. I paid Jasper his retainer via wire transfer from my phone, right there in the chair. I took a cab straight to O'Hare. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't change out of my charcoal suit. I bought a ticket on the first flight to Miami on my personal Amex. The flight was a 3-hour purgatory. The Wi-Fi was broken, which was a blessing. I couldn't refresh the news. I couldn't see how many more outlets had picked up my mother's interview. I just stared out the window at the endless blanket of clouds, my purse tucked tightly under the seat in front of me, the printed email burning a hole in the leather. It was raining when I landed in Miami, a heavy, humid downpour that felt like breathing bathwater. I caught a ride to Jackson Memorial Hospital. The cardiovascular ICU was on the 4th floor. It smelled like bleach and stale coffee. I walked past the nurse's station and found the waiting room. Brooke was sitting in a vinyl chair in the corner. She had her knees pulled up to her chest, her arms wrapped around her legs. She looked terrible. The arrogant, sharply dressed COO from the gala was entirely gone. She was just a terrified 28-year-old girl in a wrinkled sweater. She looked up when I walked in. She didn't stand up. She didn't yell. She just stared at me with an exhaustion so deep it looked like it hurt her bones. Where is she? I asked. Room 412, Brooke said, her voice raspy. She's sleeping. thing. They have her on heavy sedatives. I sat down in the chair across from her. The vinyl squeaked under my weight. How bad was it? Brooke let out a short, humorless breath. It was a widowmaker. The lad artery was completely blocked. They had to put in 2 stents. The doctor said if the ambulance had been 5 minutes slower, she wouldn't have made it. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking slightly. I pressed them flat against my thighs to stop them. Is she going to recover? I asked. Physically? Probably, Brooke said. She dropped her legs and leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. But the stress is going to kill her anyway. O'Caven's lawyers didn't just freeze the corporate accounts, you know. They hit everything. They froze her personal checking. They froze the trust she set up for my kids. I had to pay for my Uber here with a credit card that's probably going to decline by tomorrow. A doctor walked into the waiting room. He looked to be in his late 40s, wearing navy scrubs and a tired expression. His badge read Dr. Emerson Locke. Ims, Caldwell, he said, looking at Brooke. Then he noticed me. Both of you? I'm the older sister, I said, standing up. Doctor. Locke nodded. Your mother is stabilizing. The stents are doing their job, and her vitals are improving, but her heart sustained damage. She needs absolute rest. No stress, no sudden shocks, no work. I'm keeping her here for at least another 48 hours, and then she's looking at months of cardiac rehab. Can we see her? Brooke asked. Briefly, doctor, Locke said. One at a time. Do not wake her if she's asleep, and keep the conversation light. Her blood pressure is still volatile. Brooke stood up. She didn't look at me as she walked past and headed down the hall toward room 412. I stayed in the waiting room. I went to the small kitchenette in the corner and poured myself a cup of the terrible hospital coffee. I drank it black. It tasted like burnt copper. 10 minutes later, Brooke came back. She looked paler than before. She walked over to me and stopped a few feet away. She's awake, Brooke said quietly. She wants to see you. I put the coffee cup down. I walked down the sterile white hallway. Room 412 was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. My mother was lying in the hospital bed. The woman who had commanded a ballroom of 500 investors a month ago looked impossibly small. She was hooked up to a dozen IV lines. Her skin was the color of old paper. I stood at the foot of the bed. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were glassy from the medication, but the sharp, calculating intelligence was still there, flickering beneath the haze. You came, she whispered. Her voice was weak, lacking its usual commanding edge. Brooke texted me, I said. She closed her eyes for a moment. They told me I had a massive coronary event. Sounds expensive. Even now, it was always about the money. Don't worry about the hospital bills right now, I said. Just rest. How can I not worry? She wheezed, opening her eyes. O'Caven took everything. Thad Wolfe served the injunction papers at the house this morning. That's when the chest pain started. They froze the accounts. They put a lien on the house. I'm 62 years old, and I don't own the bed I sleep in. She looked at me. It wasn't the patronizing look she usually gave me. It was desperate. It was the look of a drowning woman. You have to fix this, she said, her voice straining. The heart monitor ticked a little faster. You're the managing director. You control the file. Tell them to drop the personal recourse. Tell them to take the marina and leave me my home. I don't have that power, I said softly. Don't lie to me, she gasped, trying to push herself up on her elbows. She fell back instantly, wincing in pain. You filed the paperwork. You set this in motion. You humiliated me in front of the entire city, and now you're letting them strip me to the bone. I didn't fake the cash reserves, I said, keeping my voice dead level, remembering Jasper's warning. Do not discuss the evidence. Do not engage. You did. She stared at me, her chest heaving. I did what I had to do to keep Caldwell Estates alive, to keep your sister employed, to keep the legacy intact. The legacy was a lie built on fraudulent numbers, I said. The heart monitor's tempo increased. A nurse poked her head into the room. Keep it calm in here, please, the nurse warned. My mother looked away from me, staring at the blank television on the wall. I'm going to lose the house. I'm going to lose everything. I stood there, listening to the beep of the machine. The envelope in my purse pressed against my hip. I had the power to send the men who did this to her to prison, but doing so would send her right along with them. Get out, she whispered, still not looking at me. If you aren't going to help me, just get out. I turned and walked out of the room. Brooke was waiting for me in the hallway. She grabbed my arm as soon as I stepped out, pulling me into an empty alcove near the elevators. What did you say to her? Brooke demanded. Her monitor spiked. I told her the truth, I said, pulling my arm out of her grip. I don't have the authority to waive the personal recourse. Stellan Trask controls the firm. I'm just an employee. Brooke stared at me, her eyes darting across my face. But you're the one on the news. You're the face of the foreclosure. Because Stellan made me the face of it, I snapped, the exhaustion finally catching up to me. He used me. He wanted it to look like a family feud so nobody would look too closely at the original loan. Brooke went perfectly still. She was young, and she was arrogant, but she wasn't stupid. She had grown up in the same house I did. She knew how to read the spaces between the words. What do you mean so nobody would look too closely? Brooke asked quietly. I looked at the elevator doors. I couldn't tell her. Jasper said it was witness tampering. If I told her about the email, if I told her about the SEC immunity deal, she would tell my mother. My mother would use it as leverage in her civil suit, blow the federal investigation wide open prematurely, and get us all indicted for obstruction. Nothing, I said. Stellan is just playing aggressive. Don't do that, Brooke said, stepping into my space. Don't treat me like I'm an idiot. If O'Caven did something wrong with the original underwriting, if they broke the law, we can use that. We can counter-sue to break the injunction. What did they do? Brooke, stop, I said. No, you stop, she hissed, tears welling in her eyes. Mom is lying in there hooked up to machines because she thinks she's going to be homeless. The company is dead. I'm going to be named in the civil litigation because I'm the COO. My career is over. If you have a way out of this, you have to tell me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a calendar reminder. 12 hours until Stellan Trask deadline. Brooke saw the screen. Deadline for what? I looked at my sister. The desperation in her face was completely raw. Stellan offered me a severance package, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. 2 years salary. Full vesting of my stock options. If I sign a separation agreement and a non-disclosure agreement by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, they will pay me out. Brooke's eyes widened. How much money? About $4.5 million. Post-tax. She let out a breath that sounded like a sob. Oh my God, that's enough. Enough for what? To pay off the bad boy carve-out, Brooke said, her hands shaking as she reached out and grabbed my forearms. You can take the severance. You can pay O'Caven to release the lien on the house and the personal accounts. Mom can keep her home. She can retire. We can afford her medical care. I stared at her. To get that money, I have to sign a statement taking sole responsibility for the aggressive nature of the foreclosure. I have to publicly admit that I orchestrated this entire thing out of spite. But it's not real, Brooke said, her voice rising in pitch. It's just a piece of paper. You take the fall in the press, you take the money, and you save Mom. Who cares what the Miami Business Journal thinks about you? I care, I said, stepping back from her. It's my career, Brooke. If I sign that, I will never work in this industry again. I will be blacklisted across the entire financial sector, and I will be legally prohibited from defending myself. Brooke looked at me like she didn't recognize me. She is your mother, Brooke said. Her voice was ice. She is lying in a hospital bed, dying of stress, because of a trap your firm set for her. You have a chance to buy her life back. And you're worried about your resume? She faked her financials. I shot back, finally letting the anger through. She committed fraud. She put herself in that bed, Brooke. She risked your career. She risked her house because she couldn't stand the thought of failing. And now you want me to destroy my life to buy her a pardon? Brooke stood perfectly still. The tears stopped. She was right, Brooke said, her voice dropping to a terrifying calm. You really don't care about anyone but yourself. You walked out on us 3 years ago. You came back just long enough to drop a bomb on the family. And now you're going to walk away again and let her drown. She turned around and walked back toward the ICU doors. Brooke, I said. She didn't stop. She pushed through the double doors and disappeared. I stood in the hallway alone. My phone vibrated again. It was a text message. A Chicago area code, but not a number I had saved. Miss Caldwell, this is Thad Wolf. Stellan requested I reach out. We need a preliminary answer regarding the separation agreement by 8 p.m. tonight, so we can prepare the public statement for tomorrow's news cycle. If we do not hear from you, we will proceed with termination for cause. I looked at the text. It was 4:30 p.m. I walked out of the hospital into the muggy Miami evening. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and choking. I started walking down the sidewalk, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get away from the smell of bleach and desperation. My phone rang in my hand. It was Daniel Reyes, the SEC investigator. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Miss Caldwell, Reyes said. He didn't bother with small talk. I'm calling to inform you that the situation has escalated. Your mother's legal team filed an emergency motion for a restraining order against O'Caven this afternoon in federal court. In the filing, they allege that O'Caven engaged in predatory lending practices. I know, I said. I'm in Miami. She had a heart attack. Reyes paused. I am sorry to hear that, but the filing forces our hand. My superiors are not going to let this play out in civil court while we sit on our hands. The director has authorized subpoenas. They are going out tomorrow morning. To O'Caven, to Caldwell Estates, and to you. The sidewalk seemed to tilt slightly beneath my feet. If the subpoena goes out, the immunity offer is gone, Reyes said, his voice dropping to a quieter, more urgent register. You become a subject of the investigation, not a cooperating witness. You have the proof I need, Miss Caldwell. I know you do. You're too smart to have walked into that boardroom blind. You found the internal communications. I stopped walking. I watched a city bus roar past, splashing dirty water against the curb. If I give you what I have, I said, my voice barely audible over the traffic, what happens to my mother? If you give me proof that Stellan Trask knew about the fraud beforehand, Stellan is the primary target, Reyes said carefully. Your mother becomes a secondary actor in a larger conspiracy. I cannot guarantee she won't face charges. Bank fraud is bank fraud. But I can tell the U.S. attorney that she was a victim of a predatory scheme, which significantly mitigates sentencing. If you don't give me the proof, she is the sole architect of a $45 million fraud. They will throw the book at her. He let the silence hang for a moment. But I need the proof tonight, Reyes said, before the subpoenas are drafted, and before you sign whatever gag order Stellan Trask is currently shoving in front of you. I squeezed my eyes shut. Stellan's deal destroyed my career, but gave me the money to buy my mother's freedom and save my sister. The SEC deal saved my career, sent Stellan to prison, but handed my mother a federal indictment while she lay in a hospital bed. I have a document, I said into the phone. Reyes exhaled. What kind of document? An email chain, I said, between compliance and the original underwriter, and Stellan Trask, explicitly acknowledging the falsified reserves and ordering the loan to be funded anyway to secure the asset in a future default. Where is it? Reyes asked. In my purse. Printed out. Are you at the hospital? I'm walking, I said. I'm a few blocks away. There is a federal building in downtown Miami, 99 NE 4th Street, Reyes said. I am in Chicago, but we have agents there. I will call the duty officer. They will take the document, process it into evidence, and give you a receipt. The second that document is logged, your immunity proffer is activated. Can you get there tonight? I looked down the street. The sky was bruising purple as the sun set. I can get there, I said. Do it, Reyes said, before you talk to anyone else, before you talk to Stellan's lawyer. Once you hand that over, O'Caven can't touch you. He hung up. I stood on the corner. I opened my rideshare app and typed in 99 NE 4th Street. A car was 3 minutes away. I hit confirm. I looked at the notifications on my screen. A text from Thad Wolf, 3 hours until preliminary answer required. A text from Brooke, please, just Just do this one thing for us. Be a family for once. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. The driver rolled down the window. For Miss Caldwell? The driver asked. Yes, I said. I opened the door and slid into the back seat. The air conditioning was freezing. The driver pulled away from the curb, merging into the heavy evening traffic. I unclasped my purse. I reached inside and pulled out the folded piece of printer paper. I smoothed it out on my lap. The black toner looked stark against the white paper. Bury Nadia's report. Approve the term sheet. If she's inflating reserves, she'll breach the covenants before the roof is even on the building. It's a guaranteed 300% ROI. Fund it. It was all right there. The arrogance. The absolute certainty that they were untouchable. Stellan had played God with my family's company, knowing exactly how fragile my mother's ego was, knowing exactly what buttons to push to make her hang herself. My phone buzzed again. It was an email from my personal email account. The sender was an address I didn't recognize. Subject, Azure Marina. I opened the email. There was no text in the body, just an attachment, a PDF. I tapped it. It downloaded and opened on my screen. It was a copy of the original mezzanine loan application submitted to Oakhaven Capital 3 years ago, the one with the falsified liquidity reserves, the document that triggered this entire nightmare. I zoomed in on the final page, the signature page. There was my mother's signature on the primary borrower line, sharp, angular, commanding, but below it, on the secondary guarantor line, was another signature. I stared at the screen. The air in the car suddenly felt like it was made of lead. I couldn't breathe. It was Brooke's signature. Brooke was a co-guarantor on the loan. She wasn't just the COO. She hadn't just been dragged into the civil litigation. She had personally signed the fraudulent financial disclosures. She had committed bank fraud right alongside my mother. I looked at the timestamp on the email. It was sent 2 minutes ago. I looked at the sender address again. twolf@oakhaven.com. Thad Wolf, Stellan's lawyer. My phone buzzed again. A text from Thad. Just wanted to make sure you had the complete file for your review, Miss Caldwell. We discovered this afternoon that your sister is a co-guarantor. If the SEC subpoenas this file, they won't just indict your mother. They'll indict the secondary guarantor as well. It would be a shame for a 28-year-old mother of two to go to federal prison. We eagerly await your decision by 8 p.m. I dropped the phone onto the leather seat. Stellan didn't just have a trap. He had a labyrinth. He knew I was talking to the SEC, or at least he suspected it. He knew the only thing keeping me from turning over the evidence was my family, but he knew my mother was already older, already sick. Maybe I'd be willing to let her take the fall to save myself. But Brooke had 2 kids under the age of 5. Brooke had her whole life ahead of her. If I walked into that federal building and handed Reyes the email, the SEC would seize the entire file. They would see Brooke's signature. The U.S. attorney might offer my mother a plea deal because of her health, but they would crush Brooke to make an example of the corporate officers. We're about 5 minutes away from the federal building, miss, the driver said, glancing in the rearview mirror. Traffic is a little heavy. I looked at the folded piece of paper on my lap, the paper that could send Stellan to prison. I looked at the phone sitting on the seat next to me. Stellan was offering to bury the whole thing. If I took the fall, if I signed the ENDA, if I accepted the severance money. Oakhaven would quietly foreclose. They would drop the personal recourse to make my mother's lawsuit go away, and the fraudulent loan application would be locked away in Oakhaven's vault forever. Brooke would be safe. My mother would be safe, but I would be ruined. I would be the villain in the national press. I would be the disgraced executive who destroyed her own family for spite. Miss, the driver asked. The drop-off is on the right side of the plaza. Is that okay? I looked out the window. I could see the concrete pillars of the federal building looming in the distance, illuminated by harsh white security lights. Pull over right here, I told the driver. He eased the sedan toward the curb, putting the car in park just outside the glow of the security floodlights. You want me to wait, miss? No, I said. I'm good. I didn't get out immediately. I sat in the chilled air of the back seat and stared at my phone. Thad Wolf was a brilliant corporate attorney. He had insulated Stellan Trask for a decade, navigating the gray areas of mezzanine debt and hostile takeovers with perfect precision. But arrogant men always make the same mistake. They spend so much time bullying people into submission that they forget what actual desperation looks like. They start to believe they are untouchable. Thad had just put a threat in writing. He had explicitly linked my signing of a non-disclosure agreement to the federal prosecution of my sister. I opened my email app. I created a new message and addressed it to the direct email Daniel Reyes had given me. In the body of the email, I typed, "Extortion and witness intimidation by Oakhaven Capital Legal Counsel." I attached the PDF of the loan application with Brooke's signature. I attached the photo I had taken of Stellan's internal email from 3 years ago. Finally, I attached a screenshot of Thad Wolf's text message, time-stamped just minutes ago. I hit send. Then I dialed Reyes's number. He answered on the first ring. "I'm outside the building," I said. "Check your email." I listened to the silence on the line. I could hear the faint, rapid clicking of a keyboard on his end, followed by a sharp exhale. "Is this text message from Thad Wolf?" Reyes asked. His voice had lost its bureaucratic calm. It was tight, focused. "Yes," I said. "They are demanding I sign a separation agreement with an ENDA to bury Stellan's fraud, and they are using my sister's freedom as the collateral. They are actively extorting a federal witness." Reyes didn't speak for a long time. When he did, the fatigue was entirely gone from his voice. "This is a textbook Hobbs Act violation, and it's a felony charge for witness tampering. Thad Wolfie just handed us his own disbarment on a silver platter, and he tied Stellan directly to the cover-up." "I know," I said, looking out the tinted window at the concrete steps of the federal building. "So here are my terms. I want a non-prosecution agreement for my sister, Brooke Caldwell. She signed the original application, but she was a subordinate in a family company, and Oakhaven is now using her as a hostage. You give her full federal immunity." And I walked walk through these doors right now and hand your agents the physical copy of Stellan's email. I can do that, Reyes said instantly. With Wolf's text message and evidence, she's a victim of corporate extortion. The U.S. attorney will sign off on the NPA tonight. What about your mother? My mother falsified her reserves, I said, my voice steady. She committed bank fraud. I can't protect her from that, but she's 62 and sitting in an ICU with a damaged heart. A decent defense attorney will get her a plea deal for probation and a fine. And the bad boy carve-out? Reyes asked gently. O'Cavan can still take her house in civil court. No, they can't, I said. The realization had crystallized in my mind the moment I read Thad's text. I was the managing director of distressed assets. I knew the math. If O'Cavan's underlying loan is proven to be an instrument of securities fraud and criminal conspiracy, the contract is void ab initio. It's legally unenforceable from the moment it was signed. The default is invalid. The personal guarantee evaporates. O'Cavan can't seize my mother's personal assets because the loan they used to trap her is a federal crime. Reyes let out a low whistle. You really do know your portfolio, Miss Caldwell. I earned my promotion, I said. Have the duty officer meet me in the lobby. I ended the call. I paid the driver through the app, tipped him 40%, and stepped out into the thick, warm Miami night. The humidity wrapped around me instantly, smelling of salt and wet asphalt. I stood on the sidewalk and opened my text messages. I drafted one to Brooke. O'Cavan's loan is legally void. The personal recourse is canceled. Mom keeps the house. You won't face any charges. Do not speak to the press. Do not speak to O'Cavan. Turn off your phone and get some sleep. I hit send. She would probably never understand how I did it. She would probably spend the rest of her life thinking I had just bullied my firm into backing down. My mother would go to her grave believing I was a traitor who only fixed the mess out of guilt. And Stellan Trask was about to find out that the entry-level analyst he hired 5 years ago had just burned his empire to the ground. I didn't care. For the first time since I left Miami, I didn't care what any of them thought. My accounts were independent. My name was clear. I didn't need to build their legacy, and I wasn't going to let them drain mine. I put my phone in my purse, gripped the handle of the heavy glass door, and walked into the federal building.